My name is Melissa Arechiga. I'm from Buried Under the Blue. I'm a living descendant of the families that were displaced.
My name is Vincent Montalvo. I am the grandson of Adela and John DeNava, who lived in Palo Verde. And our home was located not too far from when we're interviewing today. Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop were three communities that were based exactly where Dodger Stadium is at.
First of all, our families were allowed to live there because of segregation and covenants and stuff like that. So they were actually isolated to live in that particular area because they were brown people.
The only place that they could go was this piece of land that nobody wanted, not even the city of LA, and at one point it had no worth. They get there, and Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop, they send messages back into Mexico, which bring other family members. This was the first opportunity that they had to own, and it was very important for them to own.
As they started to develop their communities, I'm pretty sure that the city was aware that brown people were on the rise because equal with home ownership is creating wealth, right? Creating power for yourself.
Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop were victims of a bad policy. And like I mentioned earlier about redlining was another policy that prevented them from ever owning. This policy was to strip away in the name of solving a housing crisis that we've been since the early 20s. We've been in housing crises. It has always been a tactical tool that policymakers have made to take away, indigenous communities and Latino communities.
Right, so then there was this need to want to create housing because there's a housing shortage. We have people coming home from the war that are accessing their GI bills. And again, there's no place to live supposedly. And so therefore there's this demand to want to build. So the city thinks, okay, we're going to start taking these areas that are blight and start creating projects, right? Or sustainable housing supposedly, right? But really, in the grand scheme of things, what is it? Projects, right? That's what comes out of this, supposedly creating housing. So yeah, they seen my families, or the communities, the three communities, and decided that that was a good place to put some housing. However, and then to tell them that they were going to be offered first pick. But why would you want, if you're a homeowner, to go into an apartment? That doesn't make sense. Doesn't that seem a little backwards? I mean, isn't the goal always to obtain your own home?
So, I mean, the values that we had in our community and what they represent in today's model, what's sad, our three communities were sustainable before sustainability was hip. So we farmed, we baked, we had our own enterprises there. We had stores. I mean, this was a little town that was lost in a ravine that the city didn't care about until it became vital land and looked at as a housing project, right? And once they said, let's do the housing projects, we're gonna offer you guys homes. People don't realize that those tactics of intimidation are still here today. The only difference is these were homeowners. And in that community, a home wasn't looked at as I'm better than you, because the way my grandparents always explained it was, you gotta understand, we were one giant family on one rancho. Nobody was more wealthier than the other. What we did want to do is make sure that if we had a big family, that they would inherit a home down the road so that their kids would have a chance at the American dream. And the biggest part of that American dream was you owned a home. You couldn't do that. And they took it as pride, because I think the one thing that people misinterpret back then, my grandma used to tell me, she said, they used to think we were throwing it in their faces, but it wasn't. It was a pride that we had a deed to a piece of land that we own on American soil, when we don't even know if our ancestors owned it and we're just re-owning it again. We're repaying for something we already owned. And so we understood that very young, the importance of home ownership, but also the tragedies that came with it. That American policy would also turn your American dream as a Latino into an American nightmare. And that's what happened to the three communities of Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. So how they obtained the land was originally, the land was settled to get a public housing. And like I stated before, those are just the narratives they give. Now, from the Western teachings, they tell you that's progress, it just happens. But, you know, I recently released some TikToks on it, just showing how, like Rosalind Wyman was involved in it, and she spearheaded. How the narrative that's out there has always been said, O'Malley just showed up and the land was there. And Wyman now, when she got her award at the Coliseum, is basically saying, no, I was wheeling and dealing with him. You know, we had to do it. See, those policies today, they're unethical. And that is an unethical practice today, but it wasn't back then.
But they're equally responsible because the Dodgers Corporation couldn't have obtained the land without the city's help, right? And also the Dodgers too were able, and they had the funding to like appeal the court case. It was a local Supreme Court case that was heard right here, and the judge did declare that it was a gross use of, overuse of eminent domain. So, you know, at that point the land should have went back to the people, but it didn't. The Dodgers, because they had money, they took their money and their wealth and they used it to push the case forward, to appeal it, right? Why didn't they just leave it alone? Because they were determined to get that land, right? There was no respect for the people.
Dodgers come in, Dodgers say, we're gonna give you, you know, I think it was Wrigley Field and Compton. That was part of the deal, and some money. In return, Wrigley's, I forgot how many acres it was, they got 315 acres of our land. Part of the original deal was to give 27 acres to the city back as a park, in which O'Malley fought drastically with the millions he was making. And on top of that, he got $2 million to grade the hill of public money, which today would never happen. If we look at SoFi Stadium and how they fought for public money not to be integrated. And I think those are telltale historical signs for us to understand how powerful this deal was back then, how it's no different than a backdoor deal we see today in housing, and that the Dodgers like to take the stand to say, we've changed so many owners, and fans have this theory in their head, right? And I always remind them this, if the city stole the land, and we know this because it's already been set precedent by Bruce's Beach on eminent domain, then current law says that if you receive stolen property, you're as guilty as the person who took it. And so the only solution that happens at that point is the land gets returned back with the property. And that is exactly where we stand right now.
What do we want? We would like, I think it would be a good place to start as a public apology from the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, and the Dodgers Corporation for the injustices that they did to us, to our families, to our communities, and how they abused the law. You know, and again, this is why it's important that our community get involved and specifically take up civics and take up space, and not just through public comment and protesting, but actually sit in the seats that can script and make the decisions and change the policies that we need to see changed on the books. Hopefully one day eradicate eminent domain, because that's important so that nobody will ever have to suffer what we did, you know, or nobody else can use that law against us.
But also the three communities centers named after the three communities, very important. Each of those community centers will hold the values of those three communities.
Aside from that, I think that reparations for all the renters and homeowners would be very important because they did steal our generational wealth. And yeah, I think the land should be returned. I do, you know, because we look at Bruce's Beach and I think it's very important and to see that it's possible, it's capable. So when people say it happened a long time ago, well, Bruce's Beach happened 100 years ago. Ours was only 60, so what's the difference? And the same laws were misused. Same people were still in power. You know, so it's very important that the land be returned as well.